of the congregation, but maybe you all are just more excited about just being here and mingling, and that's probably even better. So I have no problem rushing through it. And if you have questions and want to talk about it, I was going to have Q&A time. We can just talk about it over lunch or something as well. I started making this presentation in 2019 when I was a vicar in Kaiserslautern, and we went on our Wittenberg retreat and stayed at the old Latin school. And I was going to present on the history of KELC. And what it turned into was a history of the St. Michael's Congregation of the Zelk, because that's all I could find records for in the church office. So I found all the records for St. Michael's. Is my microphone going in? Hello? Yeah? Okay. This is in my head, sorry. And I found all the records for St. Michael's, and I couldn't find anything on KELC. And then, when I came here as pastor then, a couple years later, we were having a church cleanup day, and I found all the records in one cardboard box in the back closet. There's a laser pointer. Back through there, that closet. So I always thought I would peek through. We would come early so my wife could practice organ, and I would peek through the record book and kind of look at pictures here and there. And I said, someday I need an excuse to go through all of these records and find out what actually happened here. How did this thing get started? Who are we and where did we come from? Because in order to know where you're going to go, you got to know where you've come from. That's kind of how I've always looked at life and history, and that's what I wanted to do here as well. So I finally dug through 40th anniversary. I had the excuse to dig through all the records available for KELC, which run from about 1985 to 1995. So the exact date that Pastor Morrison came, and then there's no record of anything. I think because that was a switch to email. And I think everything before that was written and sent around, snail mail. I've got all the letters from synodical headquarters to the congregation and back and forth. But by 95, it was email. So there's no record anymore. They're on servers or drives or whatever, lost somewhere else. So we have a little bit here and there, but pretty much all I can tell you is what happened from 85 to 95. And then just by talking to other folks, I think we need to piece together an oral history of the congregation from 95 until the present. And we can do that just by the people who are in this room right now. So that's part of today. But really, you cannot understand KELC unless you understand first St. Michael's, our host congregation from the very beginning. And you can't understand really the work of the Missouri Synod in Germany unless you go way back into the 19th century, which is what I did at Wittenberg, and I will not bore you with the 19th century today. I want to start with post-1945, especially because we're celebrating 40 years of KELC's history right now. And of course, 40 years before that is 1945. And Mason Westfall, one of our elders, has been sending me email updates from the historian at Ramstein, who I invited today, and I wonder if he's here. He's not here. Okay, there you go. Has been sending updates. This day in history, 1945, 80 years ago. So like from March until May, I've been kind of reading about troop movements from the US military coming across France and into Germany, and then, the Soviets coming towards the east in Wittenberg, and it's been really fascinating. 40 years ago, the Germans and the Americans were thinking about 40 years since the end of the war. And since I moved to Germany, every May 8th, which besides my wife's birthday, is also Victory in Europe Day, which is how I could remember my wife's birthday when I first met her. So May 8th, and on May 8th, 1985, there's a famous speech. Richard von Weizsäcker, the German Bundespräsident, he gave a speech at the Bundestag on 40 years of remembrance. And it kind of changed the way Germans think about World War II. It kind of went from the generation that was very critically involved with that to kind of the next generation, and really having to think through what happened, what did we go through, what did our parents and grandparents go through, And it kind of, it's the shift to Erinnerungskultur in German thinking about World War II. And I thought that's fascinating because in my mind, that's how I've been thinking about this anniversary. 40 years of KELC, and people say, what's 40 years all about? That's not a big deal. Maybe 25, maybe 50, 75, but 40 years, of course, as Christians, you know, 40 years plays a huge role in biblical history. You get 40 years in the wilderness, which is interesting that President von Weizsäcker, he refers to that in his speech about the importance of 40 years of remembrance, because in 40 years, you've kind of got the next generation up and coming, taking the reins, so you can sit back and reflect on what has just occurred. So I think of 40 years from the end of the war until 85, when this congregation was established, and now we're at another 40-year point right now. So now is the time to really think about what has gone on here, and what can we learn from the past, and what can we plan for the future based on what has occurred here. So in my presentation, I've got a picture here of Der Lutheraner. This is just to remind me to tell you that the Missouri Synod started as a German church, and you might know that already. The first name of the Missouri Synod was Die Deutsche Evangelisch-Lutherische Synode von Missouri, Ohio und anderen Staaten. I don't know how Germans pronounce Ohio. Maybe they say Ohio. I don't know how they, in my heart of hearts, I think they pronounced it Ohio, but I don't know them. They're all gone. And then in 1917, the language was officially changed to English, of course, because World War I, there was a lot of German hostility towards German in the United States. So that's when our congregations in the Missouri Synod really started to switch from German to English, which was a process that lasted probably about 40 years, if you think about it. From 1917, you started to get this transition to English. By the 30s, maybe it was half and half, but CPH was still publishing German materials until 1974, which just kind of shows you the character of the Missouri Synod. It was a German church body in the United States that then just started speaking English. But even culturally, and I don't know, maybe all of that is gone. We've all been Americanized. Maybe there's little hints of it left, but you can't understand any of the history, even recent history, unless you understand we are a German church body, which was then set up to have contacts regularly with Germany, which is what we were doing from the beginning and continued after the war as well. I put up this picture. That's my great-grandfather on the left. He immigrated in 1925 to the United States from Germany. And then those are his two brothers here. They both died in the war. And I always think if my great-grandfather would have stayed, of course, he would have died too. I'm almost certain of it, what was going on. He immigrated. He was a Baptist. He would have gone to the Free Baptist Church on the corner and then immigrated, and the Missouri Synod had such a strong immigrant ministry that he was taken into the Missouri Synod. It was the only German-speaking church in St. Louis. So he joined, and maybe that's why I'm Missouri Synod to this day. But just to show you some of those connections, right after World War II, though, because of how the Missouri Synod was set up, German language background, all of the pastors knew German in 1945. They all had to study it in undergrad. They had to have it at seminary. And yet they were preaching in English and had contacts already, established contacts in the United States. For example, there was a businessman in St. Louis by the name of Waltke, and he was a good boyhood friend of President Truman, who I have pictured here, President Truman and Eisenhower. And Herbert Waltke then used his contacts with Truman after the war to then get our President Bankin, LCMS President John Bankin on the left side there, to get him credentials to come to Germany in October 1945, when no one else was allowed to enter Germany. You could come with the military, but a civilian could not travel in Germany under occupation. But because of those contacts, and because of our contacts in Germany, with the German language, our German partner churches and so forth, President Bankin was able to come and visit Germany and kind of take a lay of the land and see what's going on, what are the needs, how can we as the Missouri Synod help war-torn Germany kind of heal from this traumatic 12 years, and how can we unite the free churches of Germany? That was another of the main goals. How do we unite our little partner church with the larger free church in Germany and with the smaller free churches. So a lot of the Missouri Synod efforts post-World War II then were to unite the Lutherans of Germany, which eventually became the ZELC in 1972. But the Missouri Synod was really trying to orchestrate that from the 40s. Work had already been going on with it. And then to deliver this humanitarian aid. So President Bacon came over, saw what was going on, met with Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, met with other high-ranking military officials in the area. The Missouri Synod already had tons of chaplains because of World War II, and our chaplains were set up strategically as well throughout Germany to kind of allow all of this to flourish. They also met up with Chaplain Henry Gerke. He was this Missouri farm boy, Lutheran pastor in St. Louis, became a chaplain later. I mean, he was in his 40s or maybe even early 50s when he became a chaplain in the UK, but he was a German speaker, grew up speaking German at home, and so they tasked him with being the chaplain to the major war criminals in Nuremberg. Right after the war, during the Nuremberg trials. So here's actually a letter, a postcard from Hermann Göring to Chaplain Gerke in thanksgiving for everything that he had done for the prisoners. There's a great book about that. I've got it on my bookshelf at home. You can read it if you'd like, by Tim Townsend. So Bacon met up with Chaplain Gerke. Also at this time, 1948, constant travel, so 45, 46, 47, 48. Each year after the war, the Missouri Synod had representatives in Germany, and part of this uniting the free churches was also leading to the establishment of a joint seminary for the free churches, supported by the Missouri Synod, but taken care of by the German free churches, and that was dedicated at Oberwursel in 1948. And one of the first professors, Professor Esch, who's actually the I think granduncle of Jonathan Shaw, who we'll see in a couple weeks in Italy, and Pastor Friese's colleague, they're related. He's from Colorado, originally. Esch was born in Colorado to a pastor, went to Concordia, Wisconsin, went to St. Louis Seminary. First call was to London, to the German-speaking church in London, and then maybe he went to Stuttgart first, then London, and then came back to Germany in 1939, just as the war started, and he was pastor in Hamburg, but actually he was started the church where Pastor Morrison is pastor now, in Stuttgart. I think like 1934, something like that maybe. I forget if he went to London or to Stuttgart first. So to show you the Missouri Synod contacts in Germany at the time, complete overlap. There's to show you Oberwursel then. Here's 2017 when I was an exchange student. Marcus, you're in there too. Zamo, you're in there too. All right, so to bring us to Kaiserslautern, of course, after the war, this was French occupation zone for a while. A lot of stuff then handed off to the U.S. military. And as part of building up this strategic area, there was already an air base from the Nazis that they were using what was going to be the A6. The Germans were using as an airstrip, and that's what turned into Ramstein Air Base. After the war, then the Americans were building up this area heavily. You can see today what it looks like. I don't know if all of those are still around. Kirchberg, for example. But is it still there? Kirchberg by Landstuhl. Yeah. Oh, okay. No, Landstuhl, but Kirchberg is a separate thing. Okay, there you go. Paul works there. So it does still exist. Or does it? So you can see, yeah, and we're right in the middle in Kaiserslautern. So all the military kind of building up over here. And in order to do that, the German government brought in all sorts of foreign workers. Foreign, I mean, they were from the East German provinces. So right after World War II ended, the Russians kicked out, I think somewhere like 12, 13 million Germans from what is today Poland, the Baltic states, Silesia. And if you look at all the windows in the back, that's one of my, I love this window here, but my favorite windows are these over on your right side. And you see all of these different Wappen, the shields from these different territories, from the city of Danzig, from Berlin, still around, but from Silesia. There's no German Schlesien anymore. It's all Poland, Czech Republic. So all of these German refugees came from the east into the west. Many of them were Lutherans, primarily Lutheran, and they ended up where there was work to be found. And in this case, U.S. military buildup. So all of these people come to work and build up the different bases from these eastern provinces, and they're Lutheran, but there's no Lutheran church in this region. It's the Union State Church. It's a Union church since 1818. So the Lutherans come and they see what the church is like, reformed in theology, reformed in practice. So no crucifixes, not much artwork, very plain, very simple. And these Lutherans from the east said, we want to have a Lutheran church. And they tried to work with the local Landeskirche, with the state church, and were having difficulties. But finally, the French occupation government allowed them to call pastors from the old Lutheran church, from this free church in Germany. And that continued then. The gathering of Lutherans at the end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s in this area to kind of establish something at some point. They sought minority rights in the state church, but it wasn't possible. So then they sought independence. And as part of that then, I've got to speak a little bit about the Missouri Synod also after the war as uniting the Lutheran Free Churches of Germany, started having conferences every year, starting in 1948, 49, 50, 51. They kept going with it. And in 1953, this gentleman, Friedrich Godun, do I say that? Is that correct, how I pronounce it? I never quite knew. Godun. Friedrich Godun, he was a student going to be a vicar, and he went to this conference run by the Missouri Synod. And at the conference, the either superintendent or bishop, someone above him in the old Lutheran church, they said, you've got to go to the Pfalz, to the Palatinate. There's so many Lutherans there, and they need to be gathered into a congregation, but we have no one to do it. You go there, here's some contacts, go and start something. And so he came, 1953, to Kaiserslautern, and just started gathering the Lutherans. But remember, that was all in the context of this conference put on by the Missouri Synod. You can just imagine this young vicar there interacting with these Missouri Synod professors, and kind of during coffee hour or the Sektempfang or whatever, he's told, go to the Pfalz, there's lots of work to be done there. And that's the origin of this congregation, St. Michael's. There's the windows, as you see, Silesia, just in remembrance of where they had come from. There were older members of the congregation when on vicarage would go to the old folks circle, and they could still, some speak in like dialect from the old regions, stuff that's dying out now, East Prussian. Union State Church. So the Lutherans would meet in the Friedenskapelle. You can still go visit it today. They were allowed by the local state church to meet twice a month. No more than twice a month. But then came Christmas. And at Christmas time, you can hardly meet twice a month. You've got all sorts of services. They wanted Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, whatever. So they couldn't meet at the Friedenskapelle. So instead, they decided to rent the Volkshochschule in Kaiserslautern, rent the aula there, and hold a service. And Pastor Godun didn't know how to gather everyone, so he actually put out a classified ad in the newspaper, calling all Lutheran refugees. We've got a Christmas service coming up, and that just lit a fire that caused a storm of controversy that lasted for probably 15 years afterwards about this kind of unconventional way the Lutherans were advertising in this area. But because of all of the publicity and all of these Lutherans coming together, they were actually able to establish a Lutheran congregation formally, started building a property with help from the Martin Luther Bund in Erlangen in Hamburg. That's why it's called St. Michael's, named after St. Michael's, Hamburg. Up in the choir loft, there's the shield of the city of Hamburg. There's St. Michael's Church, Hamburg, and then there's the picture of the statue of St. Michael in Hamburg. And St. Michael's, Hamburg donated the organ, which is still in use today. So you see these connections with the Lutherans of Germany, but also with grants from the Missouri Synod is how this church building was built. So 1955, Reformation Sunday 1955 was the cornerstone laying of the church. And the Pastor Godun, he invited also the Americans because there were LCMS chaplains in the area. So he invited all the Lutherans. None of the Lutheran chaplains could make it. There was a Navy chaplain, there was an Army chaplain. They were busy, they couldn't make it. Maybe they had Reformation services. But General Miles Reber, the commanding general of all of U.S. Army Europe, he did come. He was able to make it, and there's a beautiful letter in the archives at St. Michael's of his time here where he talks about this opportunity, being invited, being able to see the foundation of this church, and his prayer that the work here would continue for many, many years to come. If you want to read the letter, it's right there. You can take a picture of it later. We'll go back to it. So just to see that not only were there these church contacts way up the food chain, but even military contacts from the very beginning at St. Michael's as well. Next year, December 1956, then, the church was actually dedicated. The congregation still celebrates their church dedication, third Sunday of Advent, every year. And then come the Americans. So I'm still trying to figure out in my mind what was going on basically between 1945 and 1985. The best I can guess is we had chaplains. The Missouri Synod had chaplains. The other Lutheran church bodies had chaplains. They were all stationed in the area. And basically the military, for the first 40 years, as far as I can tell, kind of just stayed to themselves. The goal was not to integrate. It was not, German-American Friendship Society, partnership, stuff like that. Basically, we're here to deter the Soviets, and you're going to help pay for it, and then we're going to be here as a quasi-occupational force in a way. And as far as I can tell, that's kind of the way it was from 1945 to 1985. But again, there comes that 40-year thing. After 40 years, you kind of start reconsidering, what are we doing? How can we make things better? How can things be different than what they were? And I think that's why you start seeing civilian parishes pop up in this area at the time. The Baptists, of course, they're first to everything. Their kind of free structure allows for it, so there were Baptist churches long before there was a Lutheran church. But already 1971, English-speaking Lutherans started worshiping at St. Michael's about once a month. That's when Pastor Godun left and Pastor Trautmann came to St. Michael's. And I don't know, I would love to talk to people who knew him personally, if there was something about him that would have invited that. Maybe if he had contacts or something in the early 70s. But for whatever reason, 1971, he started allowing Americans to use this building to hold services. And that would have led to this ongoing relationship that then in 1985 could be used to actually start a civilian congregation. And I think that's after 40 years when things are changing, people are getting new ideas like, why just go to chapels all the time? Maybe we can have our own civilian congregation as well. And I love this picture because you get this is the kiosk that's still outside today. Lutheran Church for Americans worship service every Sunday at 11:15 a.m. And then right below it, you see there in German, Gebet für Frieden und Versöhnung, 8. Mai, 85. So prayer for peace and reconciliation. So as the Americans were preparing to have their first services here, the Germans in this congregation were having a prayer service for VE Day, which is the same day then Richard von Weizsäcker gave that famous speech about how we remember the past and so forth. So it's interesting to kind of see these two 40-year segments collide right on our church sign. So besides wanting to have kind of a hometown parish, that was, when you read the sources, that's a lot of it. This idea that when Americans are in the military and they're traveling overseas with their families, you see it here all the time too. Military folks, they want a taste of home. They deal with military all the time. The last thing they want is then to go and deal with maybe a chapel service. Not all the time, of course, but that's where a civilian parish can really do a lot to help American servicemen and their families feel at home. And I think that's kind of what was starting to be thought about in the 80s, at least partially. Then, of course, as Pastor Grubmeyer mentioned, the unceremonious departure from Ramstein Chapel number 2, there were controversies as well at the chapels. It wasn't just looking for a hometown parish setting, but there were like causes, direct causes, that would say, yeah, maybe we've thought about this for a while, now we're gonna pull the trigger and just do it. And when a fire is kind of lit underneath you, of course, it makes it a little bit easier to do that and finally go and start something. Steve Kukuk, one of the founding members, he wrote me his account of kind of how things got started here, and I've got it printed, and I'll set it over there. You can read it throughout the day if you'd like. And Steve talked about being stationed here in the late 70s and going to chapel on Ramstein, and it was a Lutheran chaplain. I think the name was Erickson, Roger Erickson, and his service was TLH, the Lutheran hymnal, the TLH Lutheran hymnal, as we call it. He used TLH, and so it was just a regular Lutheran chapel service in the late 70s. And then when the Kukuks came back in '83, there was a new chaplain in town. And I'll just read you a little bit what Steve says here. He talks about the Sunday school and controversies with the Sunday school because the Lutheran Sunday school was bigger than the general Protestant Sunday school, which of course leads to tension, whether you like it or not. There's pride issues there that you really can't overcome. It's understandable. Steve writes, the fact that the attendance at our liturgical Sunday school exceeded the attendance at the general Protestant Sunday school, which met at the main chapel on the opposite side of the base, seemed to really irritate him. That's the command chaplain. At first, he insisted that we integrate our liturgical Sunday school into the general Protestant Sunday school. We told him that our Sunday school materials contain Lutheran doctrine on baptism, the Lord's Supper, and the like, which wouldn't be allowed in the general Protestant Sunday school. So we refused to integrate. That really enraged him. So he refused to allow us to hold Sunday school in the chapel. As a result, we approached the principal of the adjacent school and asked him if we could use rooms there for Sunday school, and he agreed. That really ignited a torch under the installation chaplain. So he went a step further and told us that we couldn't use chapel funds to purchase our Sunday school materials. Chapel funds are non-appropriated funds that come from the service offering. So of course you should be able to use chapel funds for Sunday school material. It's ridiculous to think otherwise. He further stated that we were not allowed to take up separate collection to purchase our Sunday school materials, as that would constitute an illegal fund against Air Force regulations. Rather than fight over that issue, we took turns personally ordering and paying for materials from CPH. I would order and purchase all the materials for one period, and another person would purchase for the next period. Therefore, no collection was taken, so there was no illegal fund. Failing at that, the installation chaplain decided to move the time for our liturgical service to a ridiculously early hour, something like 7 or 7:30, which you think 8:30 in the morning is bad here, but 7 or 7:30 in the morning. When that didn't force us into submission, he chose to reassign Chaplain Erickson to other duties during our service time and assigned a Baptist chaplain to conduct our services, complete with an altar call. If that wasn't enough, he assigned a Mormon chaplain to be in charge of the youth group. Talk about putting the fox in charge of the hen house. After these last two moves by the installation chaplain, we began looking for other options for our worship services. For a time, we held services at a nearby U.S. Army installation, Kleber, as was mentioned, officiated alternately by one of the other Lutheran chaplains in the area, Chaplain Grubmeyer. There were several Lutheran chaplains stationed at the various Army installations in the area, so we typically had one of those chaplains available each Sunday. Around this time, we organized ourselves into a committee we named the Kaiserslautern Area Lutheran Coordinating Committee. And that's what you see here. That's where all of the historical picture books that were preserved in the musty closet for so many years, the picture books begin with that, the KALCC, the Kaiserslautern Area Lutheran Coordinating Committee. So that would be, of course, the Vanderbrooks part of that. Maybe you could sit down with me later and tell me who all is in the pictures so I can write it next to them. And I don't know where they're meeting there on the left side. So meeting in January of Yeah, there's Chaplain Grubmeyer right there at the bowling alley. So you see, they're meeting already. They would meet once a month to plan events and to develop a mechanism to actually start a congregation. So rather than just meet informally and meet at chapels here and there and use chaplains, actually to get a congregation started and bring a pastor over full time. That was the goal, and they were meeting. I can't find when it actually started, but I found letters already, 1984, fall of 1984, referring back to fall of 1983, as far as contact with church bodies in the United States, with the Missouri Synod, with the ALC, with the LCA. So already like 1983, something was getting started. And by 85, January 1985 is when they said, we're going to have our first service on Easter Sunday, 1985. A sunrise service. Yeah, so it's part of our tradition to have sunrise service. There's Pastor Grubmeyer right there. And as it says in the history books, helped from the beginning. So as a chaplain in the area, and then as kind of that transition from Lutherans meeting informally with the chapels and trying to find out where they fit and where they belonged, to coming to St. Michael's and becoming an established English-speaking congregation here. So Chaplain Grubmeyer, you recognize the man and you recognize the place as well, right there. There aren't any pictures that I can find from, if you want to take a picture of the pictures, I can go back for you. I can't find any pictures of the opening service at all. And I assume because it was kind of already going as planned, Chaplain Connie Walker was doing, he did an Ash Wednesday service. He did some Holy Week services, including Maundy Thursday was a German-English joint service here. So even before the congregation was established, we as KELC were doing joint services with St. Michael's right there 3 days before our official first start on Easter 1985. The only pictures I can find are from the Easter breakfast, which would have been after the service, of course, which then, of course, became a tradition that kept going throughout the years. With the cake right there. It's a beautiful cake there as well, shape of an Easter basket. There you got a picture of some of the, again, some of the movers and shakers as things were getting started here. So Chaplain Walker, who was mentioned by Chaplain Grubmeyer, there's a book about Chaplain Walker. You can get it on Kindle for real cheap, just a couple of bucks. It's written by, I don't know, a reporter, kind of, but it takes some of his firsthand experiences and ties them all together. And the book is called The Leapin' Deacon because he was airborne, and he was actually part of the first airborne combat mission since the Korean War with the 173rd, dropping into Vietnam. And in the book, it talks about how he was laughing on the way down because they were getting shot at, of course. And he was laughing, and they said, "Chaplain, why were you laughing?" And he said, "Because I'm such a big guy, and they couldn't even hit me." And actually, he was awarded the Silver Star for valor because they were, in the midst of combat, he was single-handedly going and moving out all of the wounded casualties and slept with the dead that night to make sure nothing would happen to him. And then went off to, had leave to go to Hawaii with his wife. And it's fascinating that the kind of resolve that our chaplains have, like that they can go into combat and do this and support people there, and then just kind of go back into regular life. It's really, not really, right? That can be a discussion, especially when Chaplain Mueller tells us about our work with chaplains. But to see the kind of, the resolve and the dedication that it takes, it's really a worthwhile book, The Leapin' Deacon. You should find it and read it. And especially because Chaplain Walker was a huge part of getting the congregation established as well, simply because he was here, which is kind of a theme for this congregation, that God brings the right people at the right time. And in the military, that's where you really see it. The right chaplains, the right pastors, the right members come to do the right thing, to plan the right stuff at the right time. It always seems to work out. even though every summer we're scared that everything's going to fail because everyone's going to move away and there's going to be nothing left. And somehow God keeps providing. So you got Chaplain Walker there, also Dr. Will Hyatt. He was the second vice president of the Missouri Synod at the time, and he had also been the chief of chaplains of the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War, like 1971 to 75, I think, are his dates. And so high-ranking military and high-ranking, if you can say such a thing, LCMS pastor, kind of in one man, who was really, I think, the face of the Missouri Synod as things were getting going here. Then you've got Chaplain Grubmeyer, of course, who's with us today, and Pastor Larry Myers, who he's pretty sick right now. He wanted to join us. He's in Milwaukee, retired in Milwaukee. He was pastor at Trinity Frankfurt at the time. So as I said, he was coming down here regularly to meet with the coordinating committee to get things organized because Trinity Frankfurt already had all of that established. A civilian congregation started as a military thing. It's interesting to see Trinity Frankfurt has kind of developed into more of an international congregation, which I say here, if the military ever backed out, that's not the end of KELC. It's just the beginning of another chapter somehow, because we have international folks. There's English speakers from all over the world who come here and call it home. So there you have part of the planning meeting, April 1985. Congregation was already established, but April 1985 is when they were deciding which Lutheran church are we going to affiliate with. And that's a whole separate presentation, especially because we only have like 15 minutes left before lunch. But basically, in Lutheran history, 20th century United States, you've got three streams. There's the Missouri Synod, Wisconsin Synod. Is Rob Weiss here? He just walked in, right? Rob is the civilian chaplain for the Wisconsin Synod at Ramstein. So you've got Synodical Conference, Missouri Synod, Wisconsin Synod, that kind of stream. You get kind of a moderate ALC, American Lutheran Church, which is it goes back to a lot of German immigrant groups that were a little bit more moderate than the Missouri Synod. And then you've got the LCA, which are the old the Lutheran Church in America. They're like the colonial Lutherans who were influenced by all the groups in the United States and were a little bit more to the left, a little bit more progressive, left-leaning, however you would describe it. Those three groups in the 1930s and 40s, 50s were all trying to figure out what they were going to do, how they interacted with each other. And there's a lot of union movements, a lot of push towards unity. There's a lot of backing away. There's a lot of splintering. The whole history of Lutheranism in the 20th century can only be seen in those terms. And someday I'll give a lecture on that too. It's really great. But the congregation, when it was established, was using Trinity Frankfurt as a model. And Trinity Frankfurt was under LaCusa, the Lutheran Church in the United States of America, which was the cooperative agency of all the Lutheran church bodies, LCMS, ALC, LCA, and Trinity was under them, which is why Trinity Frankfurt kept getting every 3 to 6 years a pastor from each of the different churches, which is why any problem at Trinity kind of goes back to tensions coming out of that time period. And that's what KELC was kind of figuring out what they were going to do. The problem is 1985, all of those churches were talking about organic union, not just cooperation anymore, but actually coming together into one church body. And the Missouri Synod was a huge part of that in the 60s as well, into the 70s. By the 70s and 80s, Missouri Synod had backed off of it, but the other churches were still coming together. And in 1985, they already knew that in 3 years, January 1st, 1988, they would form the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. So when KELC started and they said, who are we going to join? Who's going to send us pastors? They went to LaCusa, this joint group, and LaCusa said, we can't really help you. We can help you financially. We can give grants and so forth. We can help facilitate bringing pastors over, but we really can't do much because we're going to form the ELCA. And that included the Lutheran Church in America and the American Lutheran Church. So both of those churches said the same thing. We really can't help you with sending a pastor because we're busy coming into our own church body. And I assume the formation of a new church body is a pretty difficult procedure. There's a lot to take into account. And so these international congregations kind of get left to themselves. Well, the Missouri Synod then gladly, I think, swooped up the congregation and said, well, we'll take you. We will support you financially as we are able to, which is then interesting to see where that looks with the building project and so forth. But at the very least, sending pastors and theological education, theological resources, whatever else it might be. And so the congregation voted in April of 1985 to officially affiliate with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And of course then, as it's written in our Constitution, which is still in effect, it's a pan-Lutheran character. So supported by the Missouri Synod, but somehow in some way needing to help the other Lutherans who also find themselves here. And Pastor Morris and I discussed it a little bit before this presentation. It's an interesting topic to talk about, and it'd be great for you to talk about at your table at lunch what that could even look like today. I personally see it as almost an impossibility because of how separated the Lutheran churches are today in the United States. Of course, the dialogues have to continue, discussions must continue, but it's hard. It's hard to have a pan-Lutheran parish when there's so little contact between those churches and so much theological disagreement today that has developed. So they went with the Missouri Synod, and then came the next discussion: how are we going to get a pastor? So the Missouri Synod recommended some names, I think 2 names altogether that first time around, 2 former military guys, and there's Vanderbrooks. For good measure, it was going to tie into something I was going to say, but as far as being movers and shakers in the establishment of the congregation. So the Missouri Synod recommended 2 pastors in the congregation called Pastor Cook. Pastor Glenn Cook, who had just retired from the chaplaincy, and he accepted the call, moved over, accepted in October 85, moved over here and was installed in December of 1985 with, you see Larry Myers present there, Chaplain Grubmeyer, and you get, he was installed by Bishop Schöne of the Zelk. So all the discussions about, Missouri Synod was in constant discussion with the Zelk about starting the congregation here, because that's what you do as partner churches. Not working against each other, but that the president and the bishop, they were talking with each other about all of it. That was President, who was bishop before Schöne. Rost. So all of the discussion was with him, but then when Cook finally arrived, Bishop Schöne had just been bishop for about a month or something, 2 months maybe. So Bishop Schöne performed the installation, and you've got Pastor Troutman there as well, who was the pastor of St. Michael's. And we have a video of that sent by Steve Kukuk. Also, it sounds like up on YouTube now as well. And in between presentations before, we'll just have it playing on the screen if you'd like to come and watch part of the service. So installation of Pastor Cook in December 1985. There's Chaplain Walker, not just preaching, but here you see teaching confirmation class as well, which is down in the basement. And confirmation then, Trinity was doing it, Heidelberg Chapel was doing it as well. All the Lutheran chapels and congregations would have a joint confirmation service. So you have there Pastor Cook with Chaplain Walker there at confirmation. I'm not sure on the year. Always alternating between Worms and Speyer is where they would do it. Of course, here's confirmation today at KELC. We had 4 confirmands in October. When you read through what Pastor Cook was doing, he really hit the ground running. It's amazing to see all the places he would visit, all the bases he would go to, drop off pamphlets, invite people to church. It was constant contact, which the Constitution talks about an aggressive evangelism program here. And when Shanley and I were talking about constitutional revision, I remember discussing aggressive evangelism program. That sounds aggressive. Like, maybe we could alter that somehow, like make it not so aggressive, but robust or something. I don't know, but aggressive. But he was really aggressive. He had an aggressive evangelism program. Would go to the hospital, just drop in on people, pass out literature at Larmsey, at the hospital. He would get in trouble as well. I'm going to have to read the quote later because I can't find it in my paper. But Pastor Cook, he dropped off a pamphlet in a lady's mailbox, and she called him and complained about harassing. She said, why are you harassing me by giving me all this church literature? And before he could say it, he was going to say, well, is that what you say about movie advertisements and shopping advertisements as well? But she hung up the phone before then. So it's interesting to see he was always having new folks at the congregation over for dinner. So when you read his pastoral reports each month to the church council, it's like had 35 people over for dinner, made 25 hospital visits, 50 house calls, passed out literature at so many hundreds of houses, just nonstop. It's aggressive, yeah. And I'm thinking aggressive like, let's take this out back. But aggressive as in really getting out in the community, which you have to do that here. It's impossible not to. That's so transient, people just don't know. That's why we constantly discuss as church council, men's group, everything. How do we get the word out that we even exist here? Because when we got rid of the Find It Guide ad, the next person who came to visit found out about us from the old Find It Guide. So we're always trying to figure out the more the better, but I don't know. A constant discussion in this congregation. Every year they would have a pig roast. Here's for I think that we're going to do that hopefully this summer as well. Yeah. We're trying to relive kind of the experiences of those early years. We've done it already with the Stations of the Cross service, which was going on for many years here. We're going to go, Mark Hester suggested we go and eat at McDonald's where we once owned the property. So we'll have a congregational lunch there. A pig roast would be nice as well. They would do every year for the confirmands. In this case, it's for the Thanksgiving for the supply pastors who had filled in until a regular pastor could arrive. They would have men's prayer breakfast, which we also reinstituted 2 weeks ago, so that I could tell you that we've reinstituted men's prayer breakfast. And they would meet one Saturday a month, have breakfast, have a devotion, have prayer, and then they would do work around the church property. And I love this picture of Pastor Cook fixing this because it's always a problem. This communion rail is always an issue. So men's prayer breakfast became a tradition for many years. There was also a women's sewing group. It was called Stab and Jab, which I think that would also be wonderful. Here's our men's prayer breakfast 2 weeks ago. And then you got a meeting with Dr. Westcott here. He was the head of OIM at the time. It was the Board for Mission Services then. He was the director, so he would come over, travel all over the world. He came and visited, and he's the one who basically told the congregation, from what I can tell from the letters, you all are bursting at the seam. The congregation knew that. As Pastor Cook was bringing people in, there was no room here anymore, especially for Sunday school. There's no Sunday school space. There's no Bible study space. So they would meet use rooms at the Mennonite church next door. Eventually rented the Brookstrasse 10, the apartment building kitty corner from us. That became the parsonage, and they would use that for Sunday school space as well. One family, the Volpe family, lived across the street, and they would use their house for Sunday school. And so the congregation very early on thought, we need to build our own place. St. Michael's was ready to host the congregation for the long haul, but already within the first year, the Americans thought, we can't even fit here anymore. We need to go build our own thing. So Dr. Westcott came and said, we'll give you up to, talking millions of dollars here. I think the figure, I have to look it up, but even said, we'll give you kind of seed money and grants and so forth, and we'll give you a loan for $2 million to go and build a property there. And then you go through all of the church council records and kind of see how things go with that. The idea is great, it's wonderful. There was lots of momentum there, but in this location, there's the constant turnover of people. And so by the time things are really getting going, a lot of folks are moving away, including the pastor himself, Pastor Cook. So even the idea of a building project, the idea is wonderful, it's great, but in order to do that, there's so many factors that need to come together, and one of those is having a stable congregation, which we by nature are an unstable congregation. in many ways. Here you can see the actual architectural plans they drew up for the church in Landstuhl, which is where the McDonald's currently sits. So plans, they already broke ground on it. They had the property, and things started to become more complicated as people left, and then as different bits of information came out. So they found out that the village of Ramstein was reassessing the property, and probably this property that they had just purchased would be reduced by 30% because the lines had been misdrawn from the previous accounting, apparently. And then the mayor of Ramstein told the congregation, because they purchased undeveloped property and were going to develop it and build a church, that in Germany there's a 30% tax on development of property. So all of a sudden they might lose 30% of their property and have to pay a 30% tax on this property, which they were already then got permission from the Missouri Synod to get a loan from LCEF, Lutheran Church Extension Fund, and they were already starting to pay on it, but at the same time, there were issues with even paying Pastor Cook and paying back salary and so forth. So the congregation itself, because of the transients, just wasn't bringing in the money. And then on top of that, there was going to be having to pay this loan off. And the plan was to start paying off the loan in 1993. And the Missouri Synod was going to help with those initial stages. And then starting in 1993, the congregation would pay off the loan for 25 years. So until 2018 would have been loan payments, which is hard to even imagine when you think of all the generations that would have come through here at the time and all kind of get passed on. And I wonder also if it's not a godsend that it fell through, it didn't work out, because if people come to church and the first thing they hear is, we need your money to help pay off that could scare people away right away as well. You never know. Also, the congregation was expecting to have 600 in attendance every weekend by 1993 because of the numbers of U.S. forces stationed here. And really, you could probably account for even more than that. But then the problem here is finding the people, and they've been here for a year and now they're just finding you type thing, and then they're out of here, or because of that, there were 100,000 Americans at the time, and statistically, where there's 100,000 Americans, there's so many LCMS Lutherans. So you could, and not just LCMS, but ALC, LCA, all the other Lutherans here as well. You could bank on maybe 600. But then, of course, Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and then came the drawdown of troops, which the head of missions for the Missouri Synod said, hey, President Bush is talking about a drawdown of troops in Europe. Is that going to affect you? No. No. That's for combat operations. That's not for, the people here support operations. It's not going to happen here. Well, by 1994, the drawdown was complete, and we were down, I think, to about levels that we're at today, 50,000 Americans. And the congregation, according to Pastor Hoke, was down to about under 40 people by the mid-90s. I don't know how accurate. I have to look at the figures as well. So constant up and down based on, but that by the time the drawdown ended, really, because the people had left, there was just no one around to kind of keep things moving here. Which then I would say KELC turned into what it's been since that time. Kind of a perpetual church plant, perpetual mission opportunity, always dreams of great things, but then kind of being brought back to the reality of it once everyone leaves and they go away. And then you have to start from scratch again and again and again, over and over again, which I think, in a way, it's, sad and depressing and whatever. You could look at it like that. I see it as a great opportunity as well, because you can do great, if we kind of form more of a permanent congregation based on international folks, Germans married to Americans, and the possibilities even for building and so forth are great in the future. But as it stands now, we have a great opportunity to not be distracted by all sorts of other things of this world, but to go out and preach the Word of God where we are. So that's where we still are, of course. Who knows what God will give us. It's interesting. That's a Flugtag. Yeah. It's noon now. Yeah. What time is your train? You're going to join us for lunch anyway, right? Okay, I'll wrap it up real quickly. I was going to wrap it up on a positive note here with the, sorry to. No, it's interesting, when, in my paper here, I've got a nice connection then between, basically, as the building, people were starting to think, even within the congregation, this really isn't possible anymore. I don't think we can do it. And Pastor Cook, he said, look at our youth group. Our youth group is falling apart as well. We're supposed to have this large youth group. We were doing so well, and now it's kind of, everyone's leaving. There's not much going on. People aren't coming to stuff. And and then all of a sudden the Ramstein air show disaster occurred. 1988, August 28th, which I always, when I heard about it, you can go see the memorial. Every year there's talk about it in town because it really affected the local population. It was a huge deal. I mean, dozens of people died, hundreds of people injured when the Italian team performing at Ramstein did not perform the maneuver properly, and one of the planes collided into another and then went into the crowd. And a horrible situation. And I always wondered, were any of our people affected by that? Did anything happen? And that's where I found out that Pastor Cook, then of course with his perpetual hospital visits, he was every day visiting the victims of the air show disaster because they were scattered in hospitals all around the area. And he even took then the youth group to the hospital to visit as well. So the Sunday school made cards, the youth group went and visited the hospital, the congregation donated money to the family of those affected. Cook was also involved with, there was a Lutheran family, I don't think they were members, but there was a Lutheran family affected, so he was regularly visiting with them as well, just for this traumatic, horrible experience. And I always see that as kind of, when you look at all of our worldly plans are going south, nothing's working out, the youth group is falling apart, and then in the very same church council report, Pastor Cook can say, but we took the youth to the hospital, visit the victims of the air show disaster. So you can see where God is kind of working out everything. Our plans are failing, but God is using us to go and do something really great in the community. Pastor Troutman, who was so critical from St. Michael's in helping the English congregation here, he was awarded the Martin of Tours Medal in 1992 for his work in this place. And that's, Chaplain Mueller can talk about it later. The Martin of Tours Medal, that's like the greatest honor given by the Ministry to the Armed Forces. Is that correct? Almost as great as this challenge coin he gave me that's in my pocket. Pastor Cook left in 1988. The congregation then sought help from the Missouri Synod again. They had a slate of candidates. Chaplain Walker wrote a letter to the church council saying, you guys have got to get this Pastor Jim Hoke. And that's who they called. And Pastor Hoke, I read his greetings before he was here then, 1989. He was installed on Palm Sunday, and then was Easter, and then the next week was a special voters meeting to talk about what are we going to do with the building. So he got to come right in, and he talks about it. He's very open about coming into like this, coming into a building project that wasn't really working out anymore. And as part of it was, there was a shift in the Office of International Mission as well. The guy who promised all the money, he left, and then the new guy came, and he said, what are you talking about? All of that, the 20,000 loan repayment type stuff that the Missouri Synod was gonna help with, it was designated for something else. So the thought was nice, it was great. But in the end, the money wasn't there. So all of this was taking place at once. So that Pastor Hoke then had to help with the congregation, sell the property. The developer said, well, you can't back out of the contract, or else you have to pay 60% of the price anyway, unless you sell it to me. So the developer blackmailed the congregation, got the property, and then he was able to sell it to McDonald's, and then the congregation made a nice load of money, a nest egg that then they could use for maintaining things. I think even, into the 2000s, there was still money in the account from that time period. We got to meet with Pastor Hoke. He's retired in Lincoln, Nebraska now. So we got to meet up with him a couple years ago. Pastor Hoke also then, just to maintain his income, the Missouri Synod said your congregation can pay for you, so they weren't really taking care of anything. The congregation, as it was fluctuating, could not really afford a pastor. To this day, the congregation cannot afford a pastor. So Chaplain Hoke then went back to the Army, to the reserves, and he was a reserve chaplain at the same time. So he was really basically half-time here, which then you see that affects a congregation as well. If you're half-time pastor, you really can't go out and meet everyone, bring everyone together. You really can't build things up from the inside out. And so Pastor Reel came to kind of help that and be the, Hoke was still on the books, but then Reel came in and he was the, basically the in-house pastor from 2001 to 2004 or so. And he worked with Orphan Grain Train. Our congregation was supporting multiple orphanages in Russia, which that continued occurring until, I think until Pastor Asher's time as well, supporting Orphan Grain Train work in Russia, which is interesting when you think about all this work of supporting Russian orphanages, and now we support heavily a Ukrainian orphanage in Switzerland. So interesting how this, even our social outreach, kind of mirrors what has occurred in the past. Of course, Pastor Morrison, now in Stuttgart, was able to install Pastor Asher. So you've got that nice continuity here. January of 2017, installed Pastor Asher, who was my vicarage supervisor, and then he retired. Our chaplains, Ayers and Grosskopf, they filled in until I could arrive. Chris Teves filled in as well, and then I arrived in October 2021, and now we're continuing to write the history. So that's the last 80 years, 40 years U.S. involvement in Germany, then 40 years of our congregation, and now we can spend the rest of the day thinking about what the next 40 years is going to look like. Because I fully intend to come back as an old man and give a similar presentation. After you correct me. So thank you so much, and we're going to, why don't we, you all can clap for me now. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Sorry, as part of my stage presence, I have to. But, and how about we have a prayer in here, and then we'll walk as a group down to Kirche Mittendrin. Let's pray Luther's mealtime prayer, and according to Pastor Morrison, we're going to do German tradition. Everyone can stand for the prayer, which we'll pray in English. Please join me. The eyes of all look to you, O Lord, and you give them their food at the proper time. You open your hand and satisfy the desires of every living thing. Lord God, Heavenly Father, bless us in these your gifts, which we receive from your bountiful goodness, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, we'll just walk over to lunch. I guess we'll lock...